the different types of line. I'm going to specifically cover 4 different types. Now this is pretty much going to be a video that's it's going to be sort of vague. I'm just going to talk about the categories and sort of what baits you can fish on it. You know, this was a tough subject for me starting. You know, you walk into a Bass Pro or a, you know, what have you, and there's a ton of different lines, you know, companies, different types. You know, it's really confusing for somebody that doesn't know, and that's the best word for it, confusing. So I'm gonna sort of talk about that and try to shed some light on that. The first one I'm gonna talk about is mono. Now, mono is probably the most well-known line there is. There's a lot of guys that fish this stuff, you know, and it's been out a long time. It's pretty much, you know, the first real mass-produced line there was. You know, Stren Original. It was the one, and this particular one is Suffolk Siege. Now, as far as mono uses go, you know, it floats. It has a lot of float to it, so that's great for things like topwater poppers. Now, this is a Rio Rico popper, and for something like this or a buzzbait or something like that, you know, having that float that keeps it up on the surface is great. Now, that being said, you need to take into account mono has what they call stretch. I mean, it's not what they call stretch, it's stretch, normal stretch, you know. It literally, if you put it around your hands and pull, you can literally feel it. It's spongy. Now, this is great for things like, you know, treble hook baits, because if I hook a fish on this, you know, one side treble hook and he starts digging real hard, you know, and he's barely hooked, the mono will give and give and give, and with a nice spongy rod, it won't pull it free from his mouth. Whereas something like braid may, and I'll get into that, you know, braid in a minute. But this is also a really supple, smooth line, so it lays on your spool nice. What I mean by that is, when you reel it up on a reel and cast, it casts easy, there's no memory. And now I'm gonna go ahead and cover memory real quick. What memory is, it's literally the line remembers where it was. Not like we remember stuff, it gets coiled like that, and when you take it off the spool, it stays coiled. Now this line right here, you see it's barely just small, you know, small little coils. It's not bad at all. There's other types of line that I'll talk about in a minute that remembers that a lot, so it has a lot of coil. Now that causes things like knotting and stuff like that. That's why for a beginner, mono is great. It casts easy, it's cheap, you know, you can fish just about anything on it, and it's a great line. Now, that being said, it doesn't have the abrasion resistance of these other lines I'm getting ready to talk about. So that means things like metal, heavy wood, things like that aren't going to be where you want to fish that. For a beginner, it's fine, because you're not worrying about nothing but just having a good time fishing. But as you progress, you're going to want to go to something different. Now, the next one in the line is fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon is very, very abrasion resistant. You know, you can hardly cut it. It's very, very tough. That's nice, because when you're flipping in trees or around, you know, metal or something like that, you want that fluorocarbon. It's not gonna break. It's not gonna do anything like that. You can trust it. And fluorocarbon also sinks. You know, mono, like I said, floats. Well, fluorocarbon sinks, and that's nice for things like crankbaits. Not particularly a square bill now. A square bill, when you get to where you're throwing a square bill around cover, go with a mono, or this next line I'm gonna cover here in a minute, because you want a line with float, because what it's gonna be doing is that square bill is gonna be running through that cover and popping off of stuff. That's why it has that square bill. So that float will allow it to come up and over, and with the fluorocarbon it would dig down because of the sink. So fluorocarbon, great all around pick. The great things to fish on it are something like a jig. I fish fluorocarbon always on a jig. Jig's great. Texas Rig Beaver, this is the Eco Lure Eco Beaver, or like the little Eco Crawl right here. That's all great things. Any type of flipping and pitching, any type of stuff like that. Now that being said, like I said, it doesn't float. So top water, you don't want to have this line. Stretch wise, it's low on stretch. It's not zero stretch like the braided line we're getting ready to cover, but it's very little. It's only about 2% stretch. So that means if you had 100 feet of line out, it would only stretch 2 feet. So that's nice when you want a good hook set, because you don't want a bunch of sponginess with a big hook. Now the next line is a copolymer. Now you remember the mono I just talked about. This is a mono core with the fluorocarbon coat on it. So basically what you're going to have is you're going to have the suppleness of mono, not quite the suppleness, but almost the suppleness of mono, but it's going to have almost the abrasion resistance of fluorocarbon. So it's sort of the best of both worlds. Now it's not as tough as fluorocarbon, and it doesn't cast as easy as mono, but it's close. This is going to have low memory, as you can see here, a little bit more memory than the mono, not quite as much as the fluorocarbon. But this is your best all-around line. If you want a line to fish worms, jigs, something like a spinnerbait's what I throw on this. Square bill's great. Popper you can fish on it. Pretty much anything you can fish on this line, other than a frog. Don't throw a frog on nothing but braid. I'm getting ready to cover the braid, but it's just a great all-around line. I would say if you're a beginner, start with the mono or this. Don't go to the fluorocarbon because you're going to have a lot of trouble. As far as companies go, there's a lot of great companies that make copolymer, mono, and fluorocarbon. I like fluorocarbon wise, I like mono. Line makes great copolymer. I like the Gamma as well. Mono wise, Suffix is good. If I want a really smooth line, if I want a tough mono, I'm gonna go with something like the Berkeley XT, which I'm pretty much using fluorocarbon instead of that. But to begin with, the XT is great if you want something a little bit tougher. But copolymer is probably going to be your best line for your beginner. Start with mono and then go straight to copolymer once you get used to that mono. Next up, we have braid. Now, braid is the most expensive and it's the toughest out of all this line. Now, you'll notice something different about this line, and when I put it up against the fluorocarbon, you'll notice the fluorocarbon is clear. Now that makes it completely invisible underwater. Now braid is not. I don't know how well you're gonna be able to see this, but you can see braid is solid. So what this means is, one, it's not invisible. If you're fishing in dirty water, it doesn't matter, the fish don't care. But in clear water, if you're fishing for smallmouth or something like that, I would say go with the fluorocarbon. But braid is literally what it says it is. It's a braided material. Now, there's a few different materials that people use, but they're basically taking really small fibers and winding it together. Now, this has no stretch. Literally no stretch. So this is nice for something like a frog. Frog is a must on braid. You gotta throw the braid, because that fish has to crush that frog, and you got to get that big hook in there. And same with like the Eco Beaver. With that big hook, you want the no stretch, because it's gonna just go straight and popping that hook in. That being said, treble hook baits aren't great on braid, because like I said, when you get them barely hooked like that and you don't want it to pull out, the braid will pull it out. So all around line, copolymer takes that. Next is the braid, because you can throw a lot on it. It floats, so they're just about anything. Now, your favorite is going to be your personal preference. For me, I like fluorocarbon. Fluorocarbon's the best thing out there for me. I'm not real fond of braid. For whatever reason, it's not my thing. I prefer fluorocarbon, but braid is some great line, and I have to use it sometimes. But get what you like, and the only way to figure that out is to just go try lines. Now, I will tell you, when you go to buy fluorocarbon, buy some high quality stuff. If you buy cheaper fluorocarbon, you're going to have problems with it. It's going to coil even more, it's not going to last very long, and it's just going to be a bad experience. Now, the mono and stuff, you can get away with cheaper stuff. The Suffolk Siege is a little bit more expensive mono, but you know, the old original Berkeley Trilene is the best out there for the price. Braid wise, high quality braid is good. I'll tell you, don't go with the Power Pro Spectra. There's a lot of people that like that stuff, but on certain rods it will tear up your guides. Now, I use Enigma rods personally, the Aaron's Edge series. They don't tear it up. I don't use Power Pro anymore though. Go with a high quality braid because it's not going to tear up your guides. You know, this Sunline, this is FX2, is really smooth. Suffolk is some great stuff, but that original Power Pro Spectra will tear up your guides if you're not careful. But pretty much just get out there and try it. You know, just try different lines and figure out what you like. Starters, you know, if you guys are really beginners, mono or copolymer. Fish that for a couple months, get used to how it acts, then you can maybe go to a braid. The best way to tell if you're ready to go the braid or not is if you're not backlashing anymore. If you're backlashing, what the braid will do, because it's so thin, now I forgot to mention that, my bad, but braid, this is 60-pound braid, all right? And the 60-pound braid is the diameter of 15-pound monofilament. So that means it's going to be really, really thin. It's going to cast great. But also, that means when you backlash, it's going to knot. You know, if you get it up in a ball like this, it'll knot. This won't, because it's high quality stuff. But your cheaper braids will knot. So as soon as you stop backlashing on a regular basis, go to the braid. And that, you know, that's the easiest way to tell. As far as when you're ready for the fluorocarbon, that's going to be a big step, because like I said, the fluorocarbon coils a lot. So that can be a problem if you backlash at all, because that when you go to pick out the backlash, it'll knot, or the backlash itself will knot up in the braid. I mean, in the spool. So you got to be careful of that. But cut, guys, I had a phone call that I need to take. But like I was saying, braid is great, but the fluorocarbon is going to be a big step because of the knotting. So get good with braid, mono, and copolymer. Then try going to the fluorocarbon. I'll tell you something you need to keep in consideration: a bigger spooled reel. Now, I don't mean the 300, like, you know, 300 EXO or something ridiculous size like that, but a little bit bigger spool. And here's an example of it right now. This is a Quantum Smoke Speed Freak. All right, and you can see it's a pretty narrow spool. This is a Shimano Sitica. Compared, the Shimano Sitica has a lot wider spool. This has a narrower spool. So what that's going to do is allow the coils on the fluorocarbon to be wider, and that's going to make the knotting less because it's bigger coils. But pretty much all these lines are great. The copolymer mono, easiest fishing. Braid can be great, but you got to watch the knotting. Fluorocarbon can be great, but you got to watch the knotting. So check it out. Hope some of these tips help you. You know, like I said, this was a very confusing topic for me for a long time, but once you get it down and once you get the companies you like, you won't even think about it anymore. So get started, figure out what you like, and go catch some fish. But thanks for watching, guys, and please hit the subscribe button, and go follow me on Instagram at SquareBuilder24. Thanks, guys.